People had a fun time. People had a good time in Kelowna.
If Kelowna wanted to be a community of the future, it had to have its own airport.
Transportation was very important for all the business and for our community.
There were no women who were nominated for director.
Between the 1950s and 1990, Kelowna transformed faster than anyone could have imagined.
Tourism took over because it was just the natural growth of people having a good time in the great outdoors.
In July 1958, Kelowna became more connected than ever before. With the opening of the Okanagan Lake Bridge, travelers could finally cross the lake without relying on a ferry.
Transportation was very important for all the business and for our community at the time, because getting people in and out of Kelowna, we're a tourism city. We have a lot of goods here, so it means a lot to reduce the time of transportation. I mean, who's going to drive through the Okanagan and wait for a ferry? So the bridge was huge.
After years of exploring expanded ferry service and an east side road, the Board of Trade ultimately concluded that a bridge was the only lasting solution. Thousands gathered for the occasion, including Princess Margaret, marking the culmination of decades of advocacy by the Kelowna Board of Trade, the organization that would become the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce in 1961. By the early 1960s, Kelowna's population had surged past 13,000, fueled by post-war growth and a rising reputation as a place to build a life. Small businesses flourished alongside it. Construction firms, retailers, aviation services, and healthcare expanded to support a rapidly growing city.
A world-class hospital isn't just a health asset, it's economic infrastructure. The KGH Foundation was established in 1978. The goal really was to try and bridge the gap between what the provincial funding for healthcare was providing for the community and essentially what the community was starting to prioritize for themselves.
We lobbied to get the cancer center in Kelowna too, and Kamloops was not happy that we got it. You have to really lobby for everything, really, because nothing's gonna just plop in your lap. Same with healthcare. You know, our hospital's fantastic, but you have to lobby for that, right?
As the city grew, so did the Chamber's influence, expanding membership, supporting local entrepreneurs, and advocating for the infrastructure needed to sustain a modern economy. This marked the beginning of Kelowna's transition from a summer getaway to the four-season playground we all know so well. As Kelowna grew beyond its agricultural roots, the Chamber helped push the city toward a new economic future.
Well, the economy of Kelowna is based around tourism for one reason and one reason only. It's a great place to hang out.
Tourism, hospitality, and recreation were becoming major opportunities for the region, and local business leaders worked to position Kelowna as more than a summertime stop.
There was something to do in Kelowna because investment and entrepreneurs and activity providers were starting to find that if they built a water park, if they built a theme park like Flintstones, if they had a great restaurant down by the lake, people would stop, and they wouldn't just stop for the afternoon. It was a place that you could actually check into a motel or a hotel, and you could spend a few days. It's the hospitality that really makes Kelowna different than a lot of other tourist destinations.
Big White became part of that transformation as well, helping extend tourism beyond the summer months and creating new economic activity during the winter season, which the Chamber helped support by offering its office space to Ski Kelowna.
If you look at places like California, for example, the closest ski resorts out of California, believe it or not, is right here in the Okanagan.
Kelowna's always been the hub of Big White. The locals were the ones that made Big White to what it is today, but it's still the locals that make us such a favorable resort for people from all over the world.
But attracting more visitors also meant improving how people reached the valley. As a result, transportation and accessibility became major priorities for the Chamber, particularly when it came to advancing aviation.
The Chamber was really important in getting the business community to focus on the airport.
We were quite involved with lobbying to expand the airport, get the runway extended.
When I look at the turning point of our community, it was essentially in 1990 when the runway was extended from that typical 5,000 feet out to 7,300 feet. And WestJet would have never come along 6 years later. And that changed the trajectory of the entire Okanagan. If the airport hadn't developed the way it did with air service and connectivity, you'd have seen a lot of rubber tire traffic come in and out of this area.
In these years, tourism and aviation became just as important to the economy as agriculture. Education followed a similar path. The Chamber advocated heavily for expanded post-secondary opportunities, helping support the evolution of Okanagan College and the arrival of UBC Okanagan.
We were involved in education as well, getting degrees for the college. There was opposition from Okanagan College at the time. They wanted it to remain a comprehensive college.
This soon changed when it became apparent that Kelowna needed better post-secondary opportunities to retain its populace.
You know, when I first came here many years ago, there was a huge gap between the 20 to 40 age group because they typically went away to go and study and then didn't come back.
Having post-secondary here is not just good for the economy, but the amount of intellectual capacity and capital in our community. People don't have to leave.
If it weren't for the work of the Chamber, post-secondary education in Kelowna may not have evolved with the same fervour. As Kelowna grew through the 1970s and 80s, the Chamber's role continued to expand beyond business promotion alone. It became a leading voice on transportation, housing, environmental protection, tourism, and the future direction of the city itself. At the same time, the people shaping those conversations were beginning to change too. In 1978, Marion Bremner became the Chamber's first female director.
I think it was her very first meeting with the Chamber of Commerce where they were wrapping up the nominations for directors. And she very just genuinely pointed out that there were no women who were nominated for director. And that led to the men deciding to hold a little side meeting, and some discussion happened. And they came back to her and said that while nominations were closed for this year, the following year they would be opening up to both male and female applicants, and she was welcome to try for director the next year. So she ended up being the first woman director for the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce.
Not long after becoming a director, Marion climbed the ranks again.
So 78, first female director, and then 7 years later, 85, first female president. And I do believe that she was meant to be the president in 1982, but she was pregnant with me at the time, and it was frowned upon for a pregnant woman to be in a leadership role. So she was asked to wait and became president in 85 instead.
But Marion Bremner's impact stretched far beyond her role with the Chamber. She was involved in numerous causes tied to affordable housing, tourism, and community development.
So my mom would not have called herself a feminist, but in many ways she was an unintentional feminist. She felt very strongly in equal rights, and she was very determined that she could do anything that a man could do. And very often she was taking a role where she was the first woman to fill that role and really help blaze that path for the women who followed.
Leaders like Marion Bremner reflected a greater change happening across Kelowna. The city was growing more confident, more connected, and increasingly willing to think bigger about its future. By the mid-1980s, that ambition led to one of the most critical infrastructure advancements Kelowna had seen. As Expo 86 showcased British Columbia to the world, the Chamber was actively lobbying for what would become the Okanagan Connector, pushing to finally link the region directly to the coast and open new doors for business and tourism.
So the connector was a big deal for the Chamber. They built the main highway for Expo 86. They promised a 4-lane highway, and then they said, oh, because of cutbacks, we're only going to have a 2-lane highway. We had the Highways Minister, Steve Rogers, come up to Kelowna, flew him over the site. We presented, I think, an 11-point argument as to why the benefits. They eventually agreed to do what they said they were going to do, was actually 4-lane it. They used to have to go through the whole Princeton, and if you've ever driven that in the winter, you know that it's just a death trap. The highway really opened up Kelowna so it's accessible to the coast for business and for tourists and that sort of thing. So we knew it was going to be a big deal, and it turned out to be a really big deal.
Projects like the Connector fundamentally changed Kelowna's relationship with the rest of the province. What had once been a relatively isolated valley community was becoming increasingly connected by highways, by air travel, by tourism, and by a growing business sector that was beginning to think far beyond the region itself. From 1956 to 1990, Kelowna began to take shape of the city we recognize today. Through it all, the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce remained a constant, focused on infrastructure, tourism, and the needs of a growing business community. Behind many of those efforts were people who believed Kelowna could become something more. People like Marion Bremner. Even after being diagnosed with ALS, Marion continued volunteering in the community for as long as she could.
What I hope that people will remember most about my mom's legacy is that she was a person who cared deeply about this city, was passionate to see it grow, and cared about the people within it. She was involved in so many programs that were to benefit the citizens, whether it was affordable housing, festivals for children, lowering crime. She really cared about the people here. I hope they also remember her dedication to community service and to volunteering, and how she volunteered until she literally physically couldn't do it anymore. And that, even if she didn't intend it to be, her life is a really great example for the rest of us to follow.
Kelowna's transformation was shaped by decades of advocacy and community leadership, and this is the story of how the Chamber helped build it.